what's going on. This is going to be the week 1 November higher time frame analysis video. We're off the higher time frames, which means, specifically the monthly and the weekly time frames. We got 5 lists, right? We got commodities, indices, S&P, and the sectors of the S&P, right? And then some stocks, and finally crypto. So yeah, we'll just jump straight into it, right? We got 10 commodities here. Again, off the monthly chart. So first we got corn. Um, not a whole lot to say. Pretty fascinating, right? Just that overall consolidation. Simultaneously, since we're on the A and D, I'll be noting essentially like yearly open. Just getting that perspective of like what has the yearly candle done so far. There is a seasonal tendency with corn to essentially like, really like expand lower in the summer. Really like May to September. Excuse me. And then potentially put in that low September to October, and so potentially we've seen that a little bit early. Um, but either way, we saw that bearish expansion, and so sort of potential market making opportunity. At the same time, too, though, I'm not really demanding like anything out of corn. This is more of just like a in my notes, it's classified as like secondary, um, like priority. As far as like observations. Um, but either way, I wouldn't be surprised if this monthly candle essentially, like if the monthly high trades to and through previous month's high, that's that conservative anticipation, potentially even violating the SIBI here off the monthly. So just like a passive look, right? We'll be watching that, the next couple months. So moving on to wheat here, not a whole lot going on wheat. Really just this, high resistance retracement slash consolidation. Either way, I'm watching the bullish order block here from September's candle. So, would like to see mean threshold respected. It's interesting how we're essentially, trading within that. Same situation as well as far as the seasonal. There is a seasonal for wheat to specifically expand in November. So really, we're in that consolidation. We're looking for that willingness to expand. So off the higher time frame, that would manifest as respect shown um, to this order block simultaneously. Eventual, trading to and through, intramonth high, and potentially, you know, to and through this July high here. Um, this is a quote unquote like primary or priority observation compared to corn, specifically because of like November, the month that we're in here. So on to soybeans. Um, well, let me just back up for a second. I didn't mention it on corn or wheat. Um, higher time frame, where we at? Discount, right? For corn. And same thing for wheat. So that is advantageous expansion, terrain. Um, and really just kind of getting a feel for where we're at. Higher time frame, right? Same thing with soybeans. Um, yeah, same kind of look, right? With soybeans, right? We talked about the seasonals for these two. There's essentially a seasonal for soybeans. Um, to like expand lower, essentially like into winter. So we haven't really seen that. It's kind of fascinating. Um, and potential opportunity to get long February to July as like a bullish expansion. So actually seeing some type of consolidation to expansion playing out a little bit early. Curious to see really how we, what soybeans does, December into January. Um, so it is fascinating, right? Like just the opportunities that commodities provide as far as like constant um, rotation, like all year round, versus I would say like I mean this is just my subjective opinion, I guess, but indices kind of tend to like cool off, um, November to like February, and so it's fascinating how like commodities essentially um, could serve as I guess just like a point of it's just another market to trade. So again, since we are on the AMD, noting the yearly open there, and so it is fascinating, right? Like true consolidation to expansion entry year. I mean, again, just like true consolidation, true high resistance. But either way, those are those three, those grains potentially looking for that early seasonal in soybeans would manifest as, continued expansion of the November candle, potentially closing, above Sibi high. Same kind of look as corn. Um, and, ultimately, like same, anticipated move with wheat as that, November buy side expansion. So feeder cattle, kind of fascinating, right? I mean, trending market the past, few years. Interesting opportunity as far as a higher time frame fair value gap in the premium. So I mean, I see this, right? Could even be there, right? But either way, in the premium here, really just watching like how does this candle trade within the fair value gap? Does it respect the fair value gap? Does it respect this candle's low, etc. Um, and just all of that within this understanding of like a higher time frame premium within the feeder cattle, market. And same thing for live cattle, essentially. So I'm kind of curious, again, like not even really watching this, um, as far as like, within my, notepad, if you will. But nonetheless, this will be interesting to just know, like, what does this do for November onto lean hogs? I mean, really, just like low resistance, sell side stop hunt, potentially returning, to the front gap. Um, but I mean, really, within the equilibrium area, with this month, right, officially returned into the discount. So wouldn't be surprised if we see that type of, that follow through essentially. Interesting as well, we are, essentially like making a new low potentially for the year. Potential Judas swing higher, right? Inducing breakout traders long. And then we see that reversal. And so, potential just that like final follow through. It'll be interesting to see like, you know, really what this does. But again, not even really watching this. Um, it's kind of more in the background. So that is the, livestock, if you will. So we've got the grains and the livestock. within the agriculture sector, or excuse me, sector of commodities. So now onto the financials, quote unquote, gold. I mean, really just kind of sitting on the sidelines. Gold is simply an observation in that premium market as well. Same thing with silver here. I am pretty interested in high grade copper this month as well. This is another quote unquote like priority observation is copper. I mean, really interesting pattern that we see here off the monthly. It's kind of difficult visually to see, but we have this inversion fair value gap, right, to the fair value gap on the buy side, and so potential breakaway gap situation, not necessarily demanding that, but if prices to continue higher, and we do see some type of situation where the BISI is essentially like left open, um, we could see like volatile bullish expansion that could be interesting, but at the same time, not necessarily demanding that. Really, for that like low resistance run, right? Wouldn't be surprised if we just simply trade to and through previous month's high, like that as the low resistance run for these seasonals is previous month's high. Simultaneously, we just this wick here, right? The range again, like within the premium. But how do we trade that mean threshold or consequent encroachment of the wick? Um, and do we potentially, like into 2026 make new highs? But yeah, again, like really just interesting situation here. Would be interesting to see if this is left open. Also, really wouldn't be surprised if it's not. But just watching the situation in and around, equilibrium, technically in the premium, and simultaneously they put the seasonal of no potential November expansion, and so two commodities here, copper and wheat, potential November expansion. Now on to oil. Again, kind of similar anticipation with hogs, low resistance sell side raid, getting to and through the equal lows, right? With the seasonal of essentially like bearish expansion during the fall into the winter. So yeah, I mean, again, like pretty interesting what we've seen so far within the month. And, really the year as well. Like that January month, bullish Judas swing before the sell side expansion, right? Retracement back above the order block mid-year. That's pretty interesting as well. Like this candle as an order block change in state of delivery intra-month here for August. So yeah, I mean, wouldn't be surprised. Not necessarily even demanding that this month, but within the next couple months, potentially early 2026 January, trading to and through. So before we move on, let's kind of go back and double check the AMD here for the for the year. Uh, Interesting, right here with copper, like very aggressive very short little bearish manipulation window there within January. Expansion, out of the consolidation into the premium to and through, previous year's high. Then that retracement to then follow up. So just very interesting order flow here on copper. Um, Even though we're, not really looking very fascinating to see the AMD, really nice Judas swing. Really nice, sell side stop hunt, AMD opportunity, and, fascinating within the spring as well. So same situation on gold. Well, I actually stand corrected. That's fascinating, right? Fascinating study of just like the correlation, right? These as like correlated markets, but really that example of the higher time frame, divergence. Hogs as well, right? That very interesting Judas swing. And yeah, same type of look as silver, or excuse me, oil. Just that run on the sell side. Pretty fascinating here. Again, like strong past few years for the agriculture, specifically the livestock, right? Like very aggressive. Literally no discount window offered. Just, trading to and through, like printing new highs, etc. So even this has its own situation. Is fascinating. Um, Again, that consolidation to expansion is another like yearly template. And yeah, again, like same template, just we haven't seen that expansion. Um, I mean, overall, like kind of within this higher time frame, consolidation, but that delivery of the essentially like delivery of sell side. So potential just essentially like run trailed stop long term. Next year, 2 years, etc. When we surprised we return to equilibrium, potentially even premium as well. And really, ultimately, like same thing with wheat and soybeans. Um, Almost getting like more higher time frame than this monthly outlook. So now onto the indices. So the past like couple days, it's Friday right now, right? The market is, you know, well, indices are within that final hour, right? Um, but the past couple days, latter half of this week, I've had my eye on essentially like, last month's candle as potential bearish order block, and so it's interesting how we've traded. It's looking like this week, the next hour that we have left of this week, um, has essentially like given us that change in the state of delivery. So I'm very curious to see what happens next week. Um, and simultaneously, like kind of same perspective. I mean, literally same perspective as we, as far as the similar array, the higher time frame order block, and just for eyeball sake or whatever, that mean threshold there. Um, Same perspective on ES here on S&P. And really that higher time frame fair value gap as well on both of those. Potentially, like seeing essentially just day trading to and through previous month's low. delivering that sell side to the buy side and balance sell side inefficiency at that BISI. So we wouldn't be surprised if we see that over the winter here before March essentially, but even this month. So yeah, that's the overall look. Like softly kind of short on indices, honestly. Um, but at the same time too, as far as like engagement, right? I didn't really talk about it, but like this sixth list or whatever as like trading instruments, um, you know, really just kind of for perspective, obviously, right? But like current contract, um, same array noted. But it's interesting, right? There's no fair value gap. Same thing on ES as well. So really again like previous month's low onto the sectors of the S&P, right? SPY as the basically, just like a vanilla um, S&P 500 ETF, nothing crazy, right? Same situation reflect, right? Previous month's open. See that change in the state of delivery. We see that fair value gap here on this ETF. And so also fascinating, right? Sort of bringing in like September's low um, as that like true violation of this array, right? So, just kind of noting that as well. Understanding where S&P is at in this premium, we then break down into the sectors here. So, I believe this is materials. Consolidation in the premium, right? Pretty fascinating. Not a whole lot to say, right, about any of these sectors right now. I am watching a handful of them. We got the consumer discretionary, right? This is really like the first one that we're watching simply because it's consumer discretionary, right? We've just traded to and through previous high, right? Um, wouldn't be surprised if we deliver some sell side to this busy here over the next couple months, um, in alignment with some type of, S&P bearish expansion. We got the communications, yeah, same situation, right? We're seeing a lot of this, just literally like this season, the premium. So just curious what happens here. Wouldn't be surprised if it gets violated. Energy potential, low resistance run here in the premium. Not even watching this though, but this is, this is gonna be like interesting to see. The finance, I mean, it's kind of same thing as energy. Wouldn't be surprised if we just like, making new high. Not a whole lot to say about whatever this is. Industrial sector, same situation here with, tech. It's sort of like a mirroring of NASDAQ in its own way, right? Um, I mean, again, like this season, the premium all sort of reflected as basically everything we already talked about with indices. Um, Pretty fascinating here, right? Consumer staples. Sort of that, understanding like consumer discretionary versus consumer staples. These two are going to be the first to, turn over and, potentially even like consumer staples. Um, I mean, as we've gone through this, right, this is just fascinating the way that consumer staples is already kind of putting in like potential bearish expansion here. And so we've, noted this fair value gap. Again, we'll be watching this as well. Really curious if like this follows is kind of where my head's at. Um, Kind of same story for housing, right? What does housing do? Interesting how we're, trading at this busy. We've seen that violation, as that retracement back into discount. Um, but either way, consolidation in the premium. Did we see, that bearish expansion as well in housing? Here we got the utilities. I mean, it's fascinating how utilities is literally just bullish expansion. Um, and healthcare as well, kind of fascinating just by like the or the market maker situation that we're seeing here specifically. Wouldn't be surprised if we trade to and through that high. Um, really just delivering some type of sell side, or excuse me, buy side to needs to be here. So yeah, got my eye on those three for these sectors this month. Then we're on to stocks. I got just like a handful of stocks here. Basically, the only thing that has my interest is JP Morgan right here. Potential bullish order block in the premium. We've seen that change in the state of delivery. It was fascinating, to essentially see like intraday, right? Or excuse me, intraweek and intraday as well, right? We're on the daily here. I was watching this in real time, just like the bearish expansion to then close higher for the day. So fascinating overall, right? Fascinating week as well. Putting in that low of day Tuesday and that high of day Thursday. So either way, how that reflects like on the monthly, really wouldn't be surprised if we just, make a new high. So let's kind of rotate through these as well, really quick. IBM, like same situation, right? All of these basically look the same, which is fascinating. Um, GE, GD, Northrop Grumman here. Very fascinating, right? Again, busy in the premium. Recently, traded to and through, previous year's high. And, really like a higher time frame consolidation. So overall, fascinating to essentially study like what happens after these types of situations. Right, we see the consolidation to expansion. What happens after expansion? Either more expansion. We're not seeing that, so retracement or reversal, right? So that retracement is essentially validated by the respect shown to the fair value to the busy in the form of that closure, and so just overall fascinating to see some type of move like this in the premium. Subtly watching that as well. Um, Interesting situation here on Lockheed. Curious where this candle closes, where this month's candle closes. Do we violate the BISI here? And from the AMD perspective, very interesting yearly template. right? That consolidation to just swing higher. Very interesting, higher time frames to be here. So yeah, I mean, wouldn't be surprised higher time frame if we see some type of move like this. Potentially, similar action on lot or excuse me on knock here. So it's fascinating, just like the difference between that and these three is their own sort of other like deep tech type of classification. So yeah, on to crypto to wrap up here. Oops. So yeah, I mean overall, I'm subtly bearish, like in the way that I'm bearish on basically just the market. I'm also subtly bearish on Bitcoin. So I wouldn't be surprised, if within like the next season or so, we see bearish expansion potentially, returning to the discount here, this higher time frame range. Um, so within that, it's fascinating to see sort of these like Bitcoin Monero relationships here. Um, this is actually a essentially a swing trade that I took on Kraken, essentially buying the sell side expansion, right? Like saw that this was happening, and then the rest of the day it like retraced into the daily range, accumulated as it retraced into the daily range, and essentially it was coming from like a seasonal AMD perspective here, so it was able to accumulate during that manipulation window. We see that consolidation to expansion, right, to and through essentially like the high that was formed before that manipulation lower, and so this is like my ideal swing trade right here. As far as the exit, I mean, you know, I did it like manually, if that makes sense. I like sold at market after trading to and through the high there. So it was fascinating. It's just fascinating to see where we're at overall right now. I don't really have FOMO, um, but at the same time too, right? Like, there's always this narrative out there. I think that Bitcoin is like driving the crypto market, and it's fascinating how we see like Bitcoin Monero sometimes do like inverted, um, like there will almost be like inverse correlation, and so that's also fascinating. It's something I've been seeing a little bit. So yeah, I'll be watching these two, just kind of like to get a better understanding of that. Um, and also steadily thinking about like the swing trading mentality and mindset. Um, we'll just go back to this swing trade. This was essentially like I think it was 17 days, and so just that ability to like hold, yeah, that ability to hold for 17 days as its own sort of situation within swing trading, and understanding like that there is no need to overtrade. And so when you're swing trading, that is like also true. Um, and so basically, really all I'm trying to say is like, with this capital that we've, grown through this Monero trade, essentially just looking to sit on it, for the next like season or so within the crypto sphere, right? Potentially even within the stock sphere, potentially deploying it there. But that's really my mentality, swing trade wise, as it relates to crypto. So um, simultaneously, just like seeing this as, I mean, like in regards to swing trading, there isn't necessarily like a bread and butter look. So that's really why I'm willing to like just sit on the sidelines, sit on that cash, and like look for that next type of opportunity within a different market, potentially not necessarily demanding that, within Monero again, within Bitcoin again, or even within, XRP here or XLM. It is fascinating though to see like, these as very correlated markets, these two cryptocurrencies here, these two quote unquote like banking tokens. Um, so yeah, I mean that's pretty much all I got as far as like the higher time frame analysis. We'll kind of go back and just get more like on the weekly chart now. So here into corn, and really sort of identifying our seasonal candle, because again we are at the AMD. The AMD is that basic, anticipate. Well, okay, if this is like, this could be the yearly open all the way down to the session open or the macro open, whatever. Um, really anticipating some type of, potential like consolidation. Um, but if bullish, anticipation of bearish Judas swing as the buy opportunity, followed up by bullish expansion, right? And so this as like the overall look. Um, and then naturally like inverted if bearish, right? That Judas swing till they go lower. So with that in mind, like as we drop down into the weekly, still here off the higher time frame, how that fractally lines up, as it relates to the yeah the yearly situation, the seasonal situation, etc. So simultaneously, we're finding all of these levels um, off of the weekly here. So either way, fascinating look with corn. Um, Fascinating gap as well. I mean, that new week opening gap. Wouldn't be surprised, right, again, if we like return into that before, trading to and through previous month's high. So, just continuing to essentially have like a bullish year in corn going into 2026, going into potential bearish anticipated expansion, um, you know, in the summer essentially, right? If you're onto wheat, right, that is that monthly order block, right? And then so within that we have the AMD as well, both the yearly AMD and the seasonal. Very fascinating, right? This correlation we see here as we refine off of the weekly. Um, the yearly open is essentially order block open, so that's very fascinating. Fascinating correlation here for wheat. On to soybeans. Same look as wheat almost, right? inducement of the breakout shorts, right? Neutralization of retail longs. Really, that opportunity, or excuse me, that opportunity, that algorithmic offering of you know smart money buy opportunities to then expand, to and through this like trail equal, the trail buy side, and ultimately same thing on corn, right? Retracement to expansion, like very simple. It's fascinating how we're doing that within, right, the overall yearly offering of the sell side expansion. So it's fascinating how we sort of like carve our way back up, essentially anticipating eventual return to, um, that yearly open there. So it's fascinating, right? Breaking down on the weekly, getting, just like a more in-depth picture here of the grains. Same thing here for feeder cattle. It's fascinating, right? You can sort of see like the weekly fair value gap as well. Um, Pretty interesting as far as like the year. Literally seeing one offering of a discount window. Similar situation here on the live cattle, that offering, and then that that follow up, and then just trading higher. So very fascinating. Interesting how when we break into the weekly here, lean hogs is just like freaking volatile, dude. Um, Nonetheless, though, similar, sort of like sell side offering here. Simultaneously, there is that seasonal in lean hogs to essentially expand lower. Um, Basically like summer into fall, and so we're sort of seeing that follow up here. Potentially, just we're going to see like a follow up of that move as this this anticipated sell side raid. So, uh, just double check this here. But again, very fascinating yearly template. True like market maker type of look. So really wouldn't be surprised, if we follow that up with the sell side expansion. So again, gold, right? Literally like one, within that week, one discount window offered compared to, silver here. So that is fascinating. That in of itself is a simply just like interesting situation. And really kind of getting on the lower time frame here, we see how that sort of is like mirrored in copper, right? That sell side. Essentially, Judas swing that occurred in silver also occurred in copper. So that's fascinating. Um, but yeah, I mean, really from like the narrative perspective, essentially anticipating that copper like catches up to the momentum that we've seen in gold and silver. pretty fascinating, right? We were talking about that January activity here. Um, Again, just like that inducement of the breakout long. Simultaneously, this is like, you even call it like, I mean, I don't know, you could call it yearly first presented fair value gap right here off the monthly. It's like just a phenomenon, right? So it was like the first fair value gap presented off the monthly within a year. And this is like the first type that it could be is where, literally like the first candle is like that fair value gap candle. And part of it is like from the last, time window, if that makes sense. So it's fascinating how like that's, essentially violated. We return and then continue lower. So I don't know, it's just a, opportunity to collect like that specific observed phenomenon. So yeah, either way, equal lows anticipated sell side raid, right? And to the seasonal as well. I mean, really nice, like bullish Judas swing before expanding lower. Then we see that retracement, right? Anticipated continued expansion. Just doing the AMD for copper here. Again, like very kind of aggressive, um, right? Within, it's gonna, get these out of the way. Since we already talked about it, but that, off of the monthly, we have that fair value gap inversion, fair value gap, potential breakaway gap scenario. You know, simultaneously, this confluence of the AMD perspective of, like very small um, manipulation window offered, sell side manipulation window offered intra season here. And so, you combine that then with the seasonal of anticipated November bullish expansion. Really wouldn't be surprised if, the month closes essentially higher. But at the same time, too, could not. So it's fascinating that when you break that down, sort of, again, getting refined here on these weekly time frames. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for the commodities. We got all of the, just sort of that greater understanding of what's going on the weekly here. So we'll go back through, right? Same thing here with the indices, right? That level as that monthly order block here. Really just noting that, again, the seasonal. Interesting confluence as well, right? That order block is that open. So it's pretty fascinating. Again with the sell side expansion entry here. Similar situation here in ES, S&P, right? Really just like that inducement of like everyone's long right now. Really wouldn't be surprised if we do see that bearish expansion. Potential violation of the monthly array as well. Trading to and through, right? Intra season, aka last month's low. We already talked about it. That's sort of the look for the indices here. Onto the sectors, right? I mean, same thing with SPY. Not a whole lot to say about the sectors. really at all. Simply watching these off of the monthly. I mean, again, this is an interesting situation though. Sort of like a clean look. Um, Interesting seasonal as well. You know, this like fall activity, returning, repricing the busy to then expand higher. So really seeing this sort of like propulsion block situation here. So this will be interesting to see, over the next month or so. Really we are expecting this to potentially go lower. Um, so, subtly, what does this SIBI do? How does price reprice it? I mean, very choppy though, right? Very choppy season. But nonetheless, there is still the overall understanding of like bullish Judas swing to then expand lower interest season here, right, for this housing market sector, right? And finally, for consumer discretionary here, really looking for the, essentially anticipated bearish expansion 2 and 3, last month. Basically mirrored look, right, of what we're looking for in the indices. And, that within like the induction of the break longs and simultaneously the consolidation in the premium. So, those are those looks off of the weekly there for the sectors. Similar type of look as the housing, right? Just like low resistance anticipated, run on the high. And there's that like Judas swing type of nature here with JP Morgan going on to essentially deliver sell side, um, neutralizing retail longs, inducing breakout shorts to then, trade higher. So we've seen that as that seasonal manipulation, below the seasonal open, changing the state of delivery. So yeah, I mean, really wouldn't be surprised, uh, next week potentially just trading to and through the high. Finally with crypto, right? Interesting seasonally here for Bitcoin, putting in the all-time high as that Judas swing. Excuse me. And again, I mean, we've seen like a, kind of like a mirroring. And a lot of these assets of that sell side delivery, that sell program, if you will, that institutional sell program, um, into spring essentially to then expand throughout spring. Same kind of look in arrow, right? Saw it in silver, saw it in copper, saw it in S&P, saw it in JP Morgan, right? So it's fascinating how we see these in these markets as well. Um, yeah, I mean, I already talked about it, but was able to like essentially utilize the narrative of that sell side window, the manipulation window as the buy opportunity. So we see how that translates to the higher time frame. And how really, off of the higher time frame, that that doesn't even have to be like a lot. Like that's not even that big of a move here off of the higher time frame. So fascinating, right? How this is, I mean, basically just like more similar action to Bitcoin seasonally, right? The past season or so, like this intra-season move, the bullish Judas swing before the expansion lower. Seeing that here in Stellar Lumen and XRP, similar, right? Bullish Judas swing to then expand lower. Compared to Monero, it's literally the opposite. So that's fascinating if you ask me. And um, sort of its own like swing trade opportunity within the crypto cycle. So now we'll kind of go through and basically like refine arrays. Um, like off the weekly here, this monthly array is like not very clean, so it's worth noting like sort of like knowing what that is. Um, right, potentially returning to that. Right, we see this like this lower time frame fair value gap here. Yeah, I mean, really just cleaning it up, right? It's basically all I'm doing. Kind of curious, like, does this get left open as price, potentially trades to and through, or does it, reprice first and then trade to and through, et cetera? So, again, that manipulation window, right, in March. Saw that in 2023 as well. So, yeah, pretty fascinating here, right? Bitcoin essentially returning to that yearly equilibrium, putting in the equal lows essentially. So yeah, man, I mean, pretty interesting time for the coin, if you ask me. I think it's gonna do it. I don't really have a whole lot to say. I feel like we went over the seasonals, in depth, and it's really something that I'm curious to watch here with the higher time frame analysis in the background. Like as we go through these higher time frame, analyses, using it also as like a tracking of the commodity um, seasonals and the way that they pan out in real time. So I'm, I'm just curious to see how that plays out as well, right? In summary, like potential bullish expansion in wheat, bullish expansion in copper, and then bearish expansion in oil. Those are like our, those primary um, observations here for the commodity seasonal tendencies for November. Um, Wheat and copper specifically for November, and then the oil really just bearish expansion into the new year essentially. Um, potential bullishness in corn and soybeans as well, and that's sort of like in the background, essentially just that setup for continued potential bearishness in May for both of those assets. Um, so potentially seeing like the buy side of that potential market maker sell in the future forming. So that's really why it's sort of the secondary observation here. As far as indices go, really subtly bearish on Nasdaq and S&P for the month of November here. Kind of same perspective for S&P sectors. Um, Watching housing, expecting bearishness in housing. Same thing in consumer discretionary. simultaneously kind of watching healthcare, potential bullish expansion in healthcare that, just pop above the high, pop above last month's high. So that'll be interesting as well to see. Um, Very similar look with JP Morgan, right? So it's fascinating how, like, within the greater perspective of the market, right, potentially being bearish, we've selected a few, like this stock from the finance sector, um, at JP Morgan, and this other sector being simply just the healthcare sector, as potential like outliers in that way, right? Potential, Monero type scenarios of ultimately like divergence, right? So, that's kind of, getting subjective, getting a little like in the weeds, if you will, but um, as I sort of like look through the overall like narrative, right? It's bearish expansion, and so we see how some of these assets are mirrored to that, and some of these are sort of outliers of that as well. So it'll be fascinating to see how those outliers react, right? Like higher time frame, but within this, I suppose relatively like short time frame, even though we're off of the monthly and the weekly, right? Within the next like couple weeks or whatever, we could see bullish expansions in healthcare and in JP Morgan. Then coming here into the crypto, um, really anticipated bearish expansion here with Bitcoin, potentially, right, to and through the equal lows, potentially, right, eventually through, essentially like 2025 low into higher time frame discount, potentially. Uh, I mean, if price was to return, below, potentially into the fair value gap here from 2024, that would be freaking epic. Um, that sub 50K, I think that would be like a really, really advantageous opportunity to load up on some Bitcoin. Um, so that's really where I'm at, like higher time frame. And so if we were to see that, we would need to see like kind of a similar type of environment that we saw in 2022, where essentially all assets like sell side, you know, sell side expansion, right? Going over to S&P here for a sec, right? We saw that sell side expansion. So really would like to see something like that for 2026. Just trying to find like another example. Gold basically did the same thing as well, right? Gold and silver, sell side expansion. So ultimately, long term, like that is the opportunity. So it's fascinating from that sort of like anticipation of the market. And then we see sort of the breakaway of that, those correlations when it comes to commodities and, cryptos as well, and even some of these sectors and some of these stocks. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got. Um, Thanks for watching. Peace.